Hello and welcome to the Active Energy Podcast. Today, our experts discuss 4 reasons to sign a renewable PPA in 2020.
Near-term to even long-term cost of more traditionally sourced brown power. I think the convergence of wind and solar from a cost standpoint, along with the availability of tax incentives, have just provided a really unique environment to build some financial and retail products, as opposed to maybe the traditional bread and butter or the traditional plain vanilla of a virtual PPA structure.
The Active Energy Podcast is produced by the Schneider Electric Energy and Sustainability Services team. We are excited to present a few special episodes of the podcast focusing on accelerating recovery and building resilience as the world looks forward during the COVID-19 pandemic. On today's show, we're joined by Clean Tech Client Managers Adam Irwin and Ian Law as they give you 4 reasons, even in the midst of the uncertainty of 2020, that signing a power purchase agreement or PPA makes business sense. For more information on PPAs and all things renewables, head to perspectives.se.com for more information.
All right. Hello, everybody. This is Adam Irwin, Clean Tech Client Manager with the Schneider Electric Energy Sustainability and Services team based in Denver, Colorado. I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Ian Law, for what I think will be a great session. I'm going to call it the cordial interrogation of Ian Law related to corporate renewable purchasing of renewable energy in 2020. So, Ian, thanks so much for being with me here today. You wrote a great article recently. It's on our blog, perspectives.se.com. I highly encourage everyone who can to go check that out, about the 4 reasons why U.S. corporates are still signing PPAs in 2020 despite all the things that are going on. It's an election year. It feels like the credit markets are tight. There's one of the worst global health pandemics in roughly the past 150 years that's impacted the U.S. and Europe and other developed markets around the world. And so it seems like maybe the odds are stacked up against renewable energy in some ways, yet in your article, and I agree with so many of the points you make, I think you build a really strong case as to why U.S. corporates should still be signing power purchase agreements for wind and solar energy in the U.S. in 2020 and beyond, and really looking forward to exploring some of those ideas and hearing some of your thoughts on those today. But maybe before we jump into it, Ian, maybe if you could please just give me a quick introduction to yourself for the audience today, and maybe it's a little bit about your background, and we'll jump into some of these thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and I welcome any interrogation from you. It's good to talk to you today. I am a Clean Tech Client Manager on the Schneider Electric team, on the Schneider Electric Clean Tech team, really helping clients set strategy, follow that strategy, and secure large-scale renewable energy projects to help them meet their renewable energy goals. I've been with Schneider for a long time now, almost 7 years. The beginning of that experience was largely focused on interfacing with developers and really understanding the renewable energy market landscape and what was available to corporates. The last 4 years or so, I've been more focused on really leading the client. So my experience comes from both what's available to corporates and what it really is that corporates need to decide internally to achieve their renewable energy goals.
Great. And Ian, I know from working with you, you've served a lot of different companies with a lot of different motivations and a lot of different energy across a wide array of markets in the U.S. and help them find both wind and solar solutions. So I think you're particularly well positioned to really have some interesting thoughts. And so maybe with no further ado, kind of just jump into it a little bit. How do you think U.S. corporate renewable energy buyers feel about the market today? What uncertainties are they facing, or why are some moving forward and maybe others maybe hitting the pause button for a while?
Yeah, I mean, I think the momentum in these U.S. Corporate PPAs has been growing since, call it 2015, 2016, especially as the tax credits for wind and solar were a bit more clearly defined for a longer term. So, yeah, I think that momentum has been growing and really been hitting a peak these last couple of years. I think the question that potentially you're asking is really about COVID and in this this past 6 to 12 month period, how have things really been tracking? And frankly, highest level, I think the corporates that I and our team are working with are just as interested as ever to transact with PPAs in the U.S. markets and hit their renewable energy goals. I think I saw PPAs signed in every month of 2020 so far. So there were certainly a lot of companies who pressed the pause button for the significant turmoil of March and April with COVID really spreading for the first time in the U.S. But I think those corporates have picked back up. A number of clients I have signed PPAs in the last month or two after taking that really necessary pause for their business. So I'd say the market is still strong. Corporates are still interested in and actually executing on PPAs. I would say that there has been some slowdown in certain corporate industries, right? So where there are certain corporates that are really looking at their balance sheet and really concerned about what's going on with COVID and with the financial markets. That's kind of a separate business-related reason for a pause. But highest level, I think the corporates that I'm working with are seeing that the developers and the owners of these projects are just as interested as they've ever been in developing them. And they're just as interested as they've ever been in really holding some of the same exposure to the market that the corporates are. And so the last few months, I've actually seen some really interesting partnerships in terms of the developers and the corporates we work with, finding common ground with pursuing these PPAs and executing these transactions.
I think you brought up an important point there, Ian, in terms of specifically COVID. So let's talk about that for a second. What have we seen in different wholesale markets across the United States, and how have they reacted to COVID? And, as you see and as you talk to some of your clients who have really understandably some really good questions and concerns about the impacts of COVID because it's impacted their business, it's logical to assume it's impacted other businesses as well, including renewables. But when you talk to your clients about COVID and wholesale electricity market impacts, so tell me a little bit more about how that conversation goes and what some of the specific questions and concerns you get from corporate buyers are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that first and foremost, we at Schneider need to respect what's going on with our clients' businesses. As the advisor to all of these clients, we're not pushing PPAs if they're not right for certain clients, especially at certain times. So I think the first response to clients, across March and April really was, what do you need, right? Do you need time to figure things out internally as a business or with these renewable deals, or would you like to keep moving? So I think that was the first question, is really what's appropriate for the client, because a lot of considerations were categorical and specific to their businesses. But then I think the conversation, once we moved past that piece and comfort was gained, I think the question from my clients at least was really, will there be significant impacts on wholesale electricity market prices such that it affects the economics that we've been modeling in our PPA opportunities?
Yeah, it's really an interesting perspective, Ian. And something you mentioned there leads me back to some good thoughts that I think you articulated in the blog post. You mentioned projects coming online end of 2021 or even end of 2022. And, I think you and I both know some developers are even pricing some options, whether at a premium or a discount, all the way into 2023, which just feels like a long time from today as we sit here in July of 2020. Again, as we think about why 2020 might be an opportune year to consider a U.S. PPA, could you share some thoughts on why we're seeing longer lead times in the industry and why moving forward today in mid-2020 may actually be absolutely necessary or required if you actually want to access a project by the end of 2021 or 2022? Why the long lead time, and why does that make 2020 so opportune?
Good question. I think there are a lot of reasons that make 2020 an opportune year. Drilling down to the lead times that you're asking about, and especially the kind of adjusted lead times based on COVID, at least recently. Highest level, the sooner you start, the sooner you'll get a project online. This especially for solar projects. A lot of the solar projects we're seeing that have 2022 online date. This, as you said, that's pretty far out. And frankly, what's going on now in the industry is that there are a lot of supply crunches the OEMs and the other providers that are actually constructing projects are quite focused on the projects at hand and the sites that they're on. So they're inherently building in kind of time premiums and extra time into the schedules that they're planning for the projects that will be coming online next year and the year after. So that is to say that the PPAs signed now are really for projects that are at least 18 to 24 or 30 months out anyway. And as additional cushion gets built into all of the construction schedules, all of the financing schedules, etc., that has grown in the last number of months with COVID and will continue to grow. So it's just another reason that moving towards a PPA execution as soon as possible will lead to potential financing and construction of a project as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting thought there, Ian. If I could add maybe just one additional angle that I know I've seen with a few customers I've represented. You mentioned the developers and the OEMs that they source their hardware from, and the construction companies, the EPC groups that actually help get these projects really off the ground, or maybe in the ground in the case of solar versus wind. But I think there's another important variable there when you think about the supply chain and the timing of projects and the long lead time, and that's the interconnection and the utilities and the grid operators and the rules and the agreements by which they de-energize a high voltage electricity line to be able to connect a project and then re-energize the line with the new wind or solar energy. That can only be done during certain times of year, and it can only be done to so many transmission lines at one time before you begin to destabilize the grid. And so I think another variable, in addition to those supply chain and logistical concerns that you mentioned, which are very real on a daily basis, I think another one is there's enough projects trying to get interconnection on the grid that it's harder and harder to hit those grid outage windows to be able to get your project online. And I know from a lot of developers I've talked to, that's another reason why they see their commercial operation dates being pushed further and further into the future, as they really wear more risk in the contract if they try to bring those CODs, more towards 2022 or 2021. So I think those are really good insights. I just wanted to throw in the idea of grid interconnection as a potential logistical constraint, as well as OEMs and EPC groups. So, Ian, I think you gave some great examples there of the supply chain logistical concerns. You shared some, I think, insightful commentary on the overall corporate demand for renewables, even in the face of certain global challenges, health or otherwise. What, in your mind, are some of the other reasons why 2020 is such an opportune year for corporates to be looking at renewable energy procurement?
There are a few factors at play. I think first, it's a supply and demand issue. The clients I have are really expanding their footprint and expanding their appetite for the number of megawatts they're looking for from wind and solar projects, especially as markets tending to rebound from COVID, and they're gaining more confidence to go back to market. So that is to say that there are simply a lot of corporate buyers for less projects these days. So fundamentally, I think regardless of the tax credit considerations, which we can touch on next, and the anticipated lead times for projects, and getting started early just to get a project online relatively soon, there's just the fact of whether there are projects available if other corporates are signing up for these projects. So that is to say, there are certainly fewer wind projects in really attractive markets for corporates these days as the production tax credit steps down. So we're looking at very, very few kind of full PTC value projects that are available for corporates, and a dwindling number of kind of 80% PTC value projects for corporates. And so with those dwindling number of projects, it's really tough for corporates to secure projects unless they move quickly. So acting fast is important. And then there are certainly more solar projects, I think, in those attractive markets because there is a longer runway with the ITC. But the fact of the matter is that at the end of 2019, projects stopped being able to qualify for the full 30% ITC value. So while there are certainly more projects kind of being refined and being tuned and brought to market, there technically is an established number of full or ITC projects available from the solar side for corporates. So I think all of these different reasons just focus us on 2020. A lot could change and a lot of different opportunities could show up.
And then, Ian, I think maybe one of the realities that you and I understand because we've done enough time and had the opportunity to serve so many great clients through their procurement processes. But I think one of the facts that gets lost sometimes is that a contract doesn't just land in your lap if you're a corporate, right? There's a lot of work that has to be done leading into it: stakeholder education, executive approval, actual more tactical work around the running an RFP, term sheets, meetings with developers, ultimately a contract. And so maybe give the audience today a sense in your mind, especially for a first-time buyer. It's always going to be easy if it's your second or your third or your 10th PPA. But if it's your first PPA, again, and we think about why 2020 might be an opportune time to buy, talk a little bit about what it's like for a corporate to go through the procurement process in terms of the lead time they have to think about in terms of their internal decision-making, and kind of lay that onto the timeline for a project coming to market. Because we talked about things from the seller side. What does a developer have to do to get a project in the ground? Talk about the buyer side. What does a buyer have to do, and why should that be taken into account today in 2020 if they want a 2021 or a 2022 project?
Yeah, I think that's really fundamental to everything we're talking about here, Adam. I think, similar to the idea of signing a PPA such that the developer can take that PPA to go and finance the project and construct the project and have that project come online within a reasonable amount of time. There's a similar logic to the sooner you start the process of soliciting project opportunities and working towards a term sheet and ultimately a long-form PPA, the sooner you will sign that PPA. Right. So to your point, really the first leg of this process is the education process, getting stakeholders up to speed, releasing an RFP, and then going through all of the analysis and decision making it takes to pick a project and sign a contract. Simultaneous to all of that is really the entire organization getting comfortable with this, from accounting to treasury to the legal team, who's a bit more involved given the contracting, to treasury to regulatory and compliance and sustainability. Right. So there is a lot of different engagement that needs to happen, which inevitably requires many months of preparation. So I think that's always been the case, but especially now that we have truly a dwindling supply of wind and solar projects, given tax incentive step downs recently and on an ongoing basis, it's actually ever more important to get that process started. And then something else I'd add, which is never positive, or it's never it's never enjoyable to talk about, but is concern, is the potential for certain projects to fall through, for contracts to fall through, be that before term sheet, be that after a couple months spent on the term sheet during the PPA process, or even after the PPA is signed, if a project is not built. So, we at Schneider are certainly seeking to protect clients with contractual protections. With that said, there is a world in which these really large infrastructure projects do not get built, and that simply means that we have to go back to square one and really pull in other projects and find another solution. So that's something we can do, but really what it means is that we've lost time. So if there is a possibility that the corporate will lose time in this process, why not get started as soon as possible, just to really control what we can in terms of the timelines.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you make, Ian. I say it so much around the office, it's probably become cliche, right? Never fall in love with the project until it's built. And the sooner you learn that it might not get built, the more flexibility and the more options that are going to be available to you, especially as supply dwindles a little bit, to be able to switch projects, right? Either a new project with the same developer, or new developer, new project, right? Having that flexibility is something we always want to try to build in for the customers that we represent in the market, and certainly would encourage any buyers, corporate buyers that might be listening today, to take into consideration that time gives you flexibility. The more time you lose, the fewer options potentially are going to be available to you in the future.
And Adam, I just ask you, given your experience on the developer side and also on the corporate buyer side and also on the advisor side, not to put you on the spot, but what comes to mind in terms of kind of the priorities for your clients and the priorities for buyers acting in 2020?
Yeah, Ian, interesting question. I think when I talk to my clients, I know, especially those, some are repeat buyers, some are new buyers. I think a couple different things are weighing on them. One, and I think this tracks back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago. One is, why is there so much demand for renewable energy in the U.S. among corporate buyers? And a lot of companies have set goals. Many of those goals are coming due in between 2020 and 2022. And so even though there's long lead times, I think smart buyers and customers, and certainly as I try to guide them, they're looking at the market to say, what do I need to do today to make sure I secure my position for my company to be able to hit our publicly stated renewable energy or sustainability-oriented goals, whether those be CDP-related, GRI, RE100, science-based targets, or maybe other non-governmental organizations or voluntary groups that they're looking to work with or looking to report to. Other clients are maybe looking at a direct PPA structure instead of a virtual PPA structure, and they see interesting point now where wind and solar have both matured to a level and reached economies of scale to a level that when you layer on the tax credits, it allows you to put together really interesting retail products, or working with a retailer to convert the wholesale energy into a retail product. In a way, we're working with a large manufacturer in Texas right now that's putting together what I think will be a great deal, and really seeing that versus the near-term to even long-term cost of more traditionally sourced brown power. I think the convergence of wind and solar from a cost standpoint, along with the availability of tax incentives, have just provided a really unique environment to build some financial and retail products, as opposed to maybe the traditional bread and butter or the traditional plain vanilla of a virtual PPA structure. And so I think those are two things I really see with my clients, that and just the inflationary pressure with different variables as you look beyond 2022, things that could potentially push prices up higher in the future if the tax credits as they exist today are allowed to continue to wind down. I think those three things really, the need to hit those publicly stated goals, the availability of new products and new production shape from wind and solar.
And Adam, to your point, I don't think it's speculative at this point. I think we've seen PPA prices for wind and solar bottom out in 2019. And whether the increase in prices since that time is due to COVID and due to risk premiums being built into PPA prices, or if that's simply because we're seeing the step down in the production tax credit and associated increases in wind pricing. We have seen that $1 to $4 per megawatt hour increase with the tax incentive change. So in terms of the inflationary pressure and not knowing what kind of lies behind or beyond the horizon, it's safe to assume that there will be further price increases. With that said, we don't know what will happen with technology costs, with elections this fall. So we're excited to see. But I think, as we pointed out, for the purposes of starting a process and getting it started on the internal side, and also getting projects really in development and in construction to be built, regardless of what happens this fall, regardless of what happens over the next couple of years, it is our opinion that getting started on these PPA procurement exercises in 2020 makes the most sense.
Great. Well, Ian, hey, I really appreciate your time today. I think you've shared some really interesting perspective from the buyer side, understanding that most corporations in America don't wake up in the morning and magically just sign a 10 to 15 year agreement for wholesale wind and solar in the U.S., right? Most are going to go through a long lead time, maybe 6 to 9 months in the case of a really organized corporate, and maybe 9 to 15 months sometimes for a corporate that needs a little bit more time to understand the position they're taking and getting into the contract. So there's a long lead time on the buyer side. And then from what you said on the seller side, obviously they need that revenue contribution contract in place, that PPA with the corporate buyer, and then that allows them to go to the market to procure equipment and to find a general contractor to build the project and to get financing for the project. And you add on all those lead times, and actually 2021 and 2022 don't look that far away. And with the pricing we're seeing in today's market, because of some of the inflationary variables that we've talked about, it really does feel like now is a good time to begin procuring when you think about the supply and demand variables and the lead times that both sides of the market need to get infrastructure projects valued in the tens and hundreds of millions into the ground and on time to be interconnected to the grid. So there's a lot of variables at play there, and I think you've helped build the case today, and I would certainly recommend that the audience today go to perspectives.se.com to read Ian's blog post, which I think goes into some of these ideas that we've shared today in greater detail. So Ian, thanks for your time today. Stay safe and stay healthy with the family in New England. And to the audience that joined today, I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to talking with you again on a future podcast. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Active Energy. We're thankful that you decided to spend some time with us. If you could leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, wherever you listen, it would be a great help to us. Please also follow us on Twitter. It's at Schneider ESS, or on LinkedIn and Facebook by searching Schneider ESS. We have also started a LinkedIn group specifically for listeners of the podcast. It's a great place to interact with peers and continue the conversation from the podcast online. Be sure to look for the Active Energy Podcast LinkedIn group and join today. We'll be back in just a little bit with another episode. Until next time.